Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming in on this rainy day, which is so very Melbourne. For those of you who've not met me, I am Professor Lisa Given. I'm Director of the Social Change Enabling Impact Platform here at RMIT, and I'm a Professor of Information Sciences sitting across the School of Global, Urban and Social Studies and the School of Computing Technologies in the STEM College. And this week is actually an extremely fun and energizing week, despite the rain. This is our first event of an inaugural series called the Social Change Symposium. And this symposium was started in order to actually start to engage our HDR students in a more interesting way to think about their milestone reviews in the context of other work that we do, other ways of thinking about our research, and to give them a space to come together and connect with people from all walks of life. So that's the spirit that we're starting on tonight. And I'm really excited to be here and to be introducing our first inaugural keynote speaker. I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. RMIT University acknowledges the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university today. We respectfully acknowledge ancestors and elders past and present, and also the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia where we conduct our business. I would now like to invite Associate Professor Karen Decker to come up and just give us a bit of a welcome on behalf of the college that is also co-hosting this event. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. Amazing to see, that people did indeed brave the weather here in Melbourne, because if I'm not sure I would have come, on my bike all the way from where I live to campus. So well done for doing that. My name is Karen Decker. I'm the Higher Degree by Research Director in the College of Design and Social Context. And Lisa here, she reviewed our program 3 years ago. And one of the outcomes of that review, so what happens is that there's a whole panel of external experts on high degree by research. One of the outcomes of the review, the recommendations made by the panel, was that we should be organizing more events with and for HDR candidates. And it took a while. There was a bit of COVID in the way, and but finally we got there. And so we had the first Urban Futures Symposium in August, and this is the first Social Change Symposium that we're organizing this week, while all the HDR candidates are doing their milestones. We've got about 45 of them lined up this week, and we've got an amazing program organized mostly by Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. All around how you can create more impactful research. And a lot of that happens through working with the communities that you work with or for. So the events that are lined up today and the rest of this week mostly have something about a relationship or an impact in the title. Today, Sadie Heckenberg will talk about respectful research relationships with Indigenous peoples. And then tomorrow, there'll be not only a social event for all HDRs, but also a workshop on community-based impact and how relationships can build opportunities to create impact with your research. And on Wednesday, Richard Watermeyer, who unfortunately is unable to come, he was supposed to come, but there was this sea thing in the way. He will talk about the politics of engagement and how you can work with policymakers to really create change. And then on Thursday, there is a research impact workshop organized by one of our own HDR candidates in the room. So it's really an amazing program that combines external speakers with our own internal skills and capacities. It's run for and by HDR candidates, and I think it's a really amazing step forward. And as with all inaugural events, yeah, please let us know what you think can be improved, because we're just trying things out. So if you want to do things differently, yeah, let us know. Yeah, did you want to introduce Sadie? Yeah, all right. Thank you everyone for coming out, and yeah, have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks so much, Karen. It's funny, I'd kind of forgotten about being on that panel many moons ago when I was at Swinburne, and it just shows you beware what you recommend, because you may find yourself later at that same institution organizing what you hoped that the institution would bring. But it is very exciting. I think it's really important that we do engage with our HDR students in really innovative ways and start to think about, enculturating this idea of community engagement, impactful work, and how we can kind of bring our worlds of academe and community and government and all sorts of different spaces where we can have an impact to the fore. For tonight, for this afternoon, I'm really, really pleased that Dr. Sadie Heckenberg agreed to speak to us today. We were just chatting earlier that, I knew her when I was at Swinburne, I was in my dean's role responsible for HDR studies at the university and in the certain disciplines. And that's how Sadie and I came to know each other. And, I have followed her career over quite some time. And it's really been exciting to watch her blossom from a PhD student to now, a really thriving academic and a leader in the community. So I was very pleased that she immediately said yes to my overture to come and speak today, because she's certainly a very, very busy person. I do want to kind of formally just let you know a little bit about her background. I hope that you've also had a chance to look at the website for today's event, but I was reading through and, it was making me tired listening to all of the things that she is doing and accomplishing in her career. It's quite special. So Dr. Sadie Heckenberg is the Academic Director, Indigenous Research, and a Senior Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Research Fellow within the Moondani Toombadool Centre, MTC, at Swinburne University of Technology. She's the chair of the Swinburne Indigenous Research Committee and the Cultural Safety Program Lead within the National Centre for Reconciliation Practice. She is President-elect of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Higher Education Consortium and sits on the Australian Research Council's College of Experts. A Wiradjuri scholar, Sadie was awarded her PhD in 2018 entitled Nothing About Us Without Us, Protecting Indigenous Knowledges Through Oral Histories and Culturally Safe Research Practices. Her research focuses on Indigenous methodologies, cultural safety, protecting Indigenous spoken knowledge, and ethical research frameworks. Sadie's passionate about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education. She sits on the Universities Australia DBC Corporate Committee, has held a ministerial appointment on the Higher Education Standards Panel, was an inaugural member of Texas Student Expert Advisory Group, and she sat on the Universities Australia DBC PVC Indigenous Committee. She was president of the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Postgraduate Association, and she's now lead CI for an ARC linkage project titled Empowering Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Girls, Changing Communities. Without further ado, Dr. Heckenberg.
Thank you so much, and it's absolutely an honour to be here. I'm going to put my water down. And isn't that amazing, our connections? It's always fabulous as we grow and as we change and the ebb and flows of life. Before I begin, let me see if, no, I need to learn how to work a clicker. Before I begin, I too would like to pay respects to elders past and present. I would like to pay respects to the Wurundjeri people on whose lands I work and grow, and to the Burrung peoples on whose lands I live and learn and be. I'd like to particularly pay respects to my elders from the Wiradjuri Nation, who without their love, guidance and support, I wouldn't be able to be here today. And when I do so, I show a picture of Windradyne, who was a great Wiradjuri warrior who not only fought for our rights to exist, but when he realised that physical fighting was hurting his community so much, he walked hundreds and hundreds of miles to say, stop hurting my people, I'll fight a different way. And I think for us as we move forward, it's those nuances of how do we survive, how do we thrive? And we do that in so many different ways. And for me, it's incredibly important that I look at how can I do good? How am I being of a benefit to my community? How can I ensure that my elders and my elders' knowledge is heard, but that my young people, our young people, survive and thrive? So I am from the Wiradjuri Nation of New South Wales. Little bit of a brag. I see Annie Caroline over there going big. Little bit of a brag, but we do like to say that we are the second largest nation in the country. It's a very, very large nation and it's really quite diverse. My family comes from Red Earth country, so central New South Wales, and it's really beautiful when you're on the bus or you're on the train and you're going home and you can see the earth change colour. It's kind of really quite special. So we are the land of much bush and rivers. And one of our very senior elders, who has since passed away, Ngiyambalganhanha, would say we need to take care of the land, the bush and the rivers. And we know this, wherever we're from, wherever we happen to be, our water is life, our land gives us our spirit and allows us to keep growing. And so we need to take care of that. So I am the daughter of Robin, the great-granddaughter of, or the granddaughter of Olive and the great-granddaughter of Charlotte Violet Rose. And I was actually at a conference recently. I was at the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education. And I had somebody come up to me afterwards and go, I'm related to Charlotte Violet Rose. My daughter's name is Charlotte after Charlotte. This is my Charlotte. And I thought that's incredibly special. When we situate ourselves and we say where we're from, it's incredibly special because it not only gives us links back to who we are and what makes us strong, but it also connects us with family we didn't know we had, or people we thought maybe family, but we weren't quite sure. So that's really, really beautiful. And I'd like to acknowledge my mother's work. All of the original artwork throughout this presentation is actually my mother's work. She's a practicing artist and an academic. So my family is from the Bulgandra mission. My Charlotte's parents, my great-great-grandparents moved on to Bulgandra mission when she was little, so she wasn't born there. But she was born without an English name, and she did grow up speaking a different language. She grew up speaking Wiradjuri. And Charlotte actually raised my mother. So my mother was given to her grandmother when she was 18 months old, and she grew up with her grandmother. So she grew up with a very different kind of situation and different knowing, because her grandmother was a servant. She went off to be a servant when she was a little girl, and she came back to Bulgandra mine when she was older, in her late teens, and she married the local butcher, which I'm like, that's good going. If you struggle to obtain food, you go and marry the man who gives it to people. So I was like, that's a smart woman there. But it's really, for me, it's incredibly important that I link back to my great-grandmother and my mother's experience growing up with her, particularly as a little girl with lighter skin growing up with a woman that used to be a servant. That was a very challenging experience for my great-grandmother, because sometimes she had to put my mother places where nobody could take her. So I live and I breathe and I am through Yindymarra. Yindymarra means respect, be polite, or be gentle, polite, honour, and do slowly. But let me see if I can make the TikTok work. There we go. This is my brother's TikTok. My brother has many, many possums that he takes care of. And he's very dedicated to saving the possums. But for me, Yindymarra means so much more, and I'll show you in the next couple of slides. But for us, it's through who we are as very beings. So my clan totem is the possum, which is why possums are so special to my family. And our nation totem is the guga, which is the big lizard. So Yindymarra is When I think of that and I think of how that flows through my being, when I think of that and I think of my elders teaching me how to be as a person in the world, how to do good, how to be somebody that shows respect through every ounce of who I am. I thought about that as I was doing my PhD, and I thought about who am I in my journey within an education system? How do I reflect my being within something that is very, very framed in that Western system? And so Yindymarra actually became my methodology. So I used a mixed methodological approach, but Yindymarra became my methodology because we can't separate ourselves from the work that we do. It's intrinsic to who we are, whether or not it's a cultural connection or whether or not it's a passion for our discipline. It is a part of ourselves. So that then brings us to that cultural connectedness. So why is that incredibly, incredibly important? Why are we then, if we're looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait work, working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait culture, that connection, that continued connection, we need to think, okay, what does that look like then? What is incredibly important to the people that we are talking about, working with, that we are respecting, we are showing Yindymarra too? So knowledges through oral tradition, storytelling and oral history, and the sharing of culture ensures a continued connection to culture and ancestors. Our knowledge, we are an oral people. Generally, we've got some really beautiful photos, like pictures though, paintings. We are an oral people. Our knowledges are shared through that oral connection. It allows us to have that continued being. And it's what, when we're working in research spaces, which is what my talk is about, that respecting research relationships, it's what makes Aboriginal and Torres Strait people, Indigenous people globally, maybe a little bit more vulnerable in that connection. Because whoever presses the tape recorder becomes the owner of that exchange, the owner of that knowledge. And that's what we're doing here. And that's what you guys are doing this week, that social change, that looking at how do we have that respectful relationship in everything that we do, including the research that we undertake. How do we ensure that the people that we're working with, because our oral traditions, our cultural connectedness are entwined with each other, how do we ensure that that is respected and that is acknowledged in what we're doing with whoever we're working with? Because we do work with diverse communities, we do work in different landscapes. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to look at how do we be culturally competent? How do we ensure cultural safety? And quite a lot of my slides actually do come from my PhD and my honours. So I will say that it's one of the amazing things, isn't it, as we move forward and as we journey through our academic career, that we learn and we grow on the knowledge that we've worked with before. So this model of cultural safety was actually from my honours originally. I sat in that particular program and I thought, how do I have a positive footprint in what I'm doing? But is my discipline, is it really culturally safe? I'm a journalist by degree, I guess you could say. I'm a journalist by degree. And that was a really interesting space to be in because it's not a very culturally safe space. And so I looked at what does that then look like? So how do we ensure cultural safety? So we all know we're all culturally aware. We all know other people apart from ourselves and our very existence exist. Yeah? We have a cultural awareness. Are we sensitive to other people's cultures? I would say that we probably are. We understand the different nuances of different cultures. We understand how to engage with respect within that relationship. Are we culturally competent? Do we understand that particular power dynamic that we may have? And if you think about what is traditionally cultural competency, where does that come from? It actually comes from a medical field. So does cultural safety for that matter, but it comes from a medical field. So a lot of the time when we're thinking about cultural competency, we're thinking about it from an institutional lens. Is our institution, is our university ensuring that our staff, our students, the communities in which we engage are culturally competent? Yeah, how How am I relating to you in a way that creates a safe space for you? But that's still very much putting that on me. It's still saying I'm the one that's defining whether or not that engagement is safe. Cultural safety says actually it's the Indigenous person's right to define that safe environment in whatever environment that is. If you're looking at a doctor and a patient, the patient can say, is this engagement safe for me? Are you really listening to me, or are you telling me what you think I should be knowing? And the same is with research, because we create these amazing, great big frameworks about what is safe research. We have our human ethics committees that tell us what is appropriate ways to go about things. And we come into those engagements as experts in that field. However, we're not experts in the knowledge of the person we're working with. That's that person's knowledge. We're not experts in the culture of the person we're working with. That's their expertise. Even in my own community, my elders are able to define what is safe and what is not. I'm just a young whippersnapper that'll come and go, well, I think. And I think that's what's really, really important. We are allowing the person themselves to define that safe space and to be able to lead that engagement. So how do we then create those safe spaces in research? What does that look like? Okay, for one, and we all know this, sure, research needs to be the benefit of the people we're working with, right? That is just to tick the box. I want to go out and help somebody. I've decided this is a really great idea and I'm going to go out and help somebody. But is that the right exchange? Or are we having that conversation and the person's defining, okay, this is what's going to help me. How can you work within that realm? We need to acknowledge that ways of collecting knowledge or protecting knowledge should be defined by the community itself. And once again, we've come in and we've said, okay, we've ticked all of the boxes. We've ensured that our ethical practices are appropriate because we know our institution has told us so. But we really need to go back and we need to say, okay, what does the community think? What would the person who I'm working with, how would they define that relationship? How would they define that engagement? One of the ways that we can do that is we can look at different models. And I really, really love Lambert's model. I mean, it is a heart in a spider web, so, you know, it's got a little bit of a flair to it, which I also like. But she's talking about what are these important characteristics to this relationship? What is really, really central? Well, community empowerment and self-determination is central. If we're working and if we're creating something, we need to create it for the benefit of. She talks about the dissemination of data and the ownership, and we'll look at that in a little minute in terms of other guidelines. The dissemination of the data and the ownership, because we define appropriate storage of data of having it in our institution for 5 to 7 years. But that might not actually be appropriate to the community. The community might actually want that. And one of the things that I thought when I was undertaking my PhD, so early stages of my PhD, pre-Swinburne, I had it at 3 different universities, my PhD. Not the best person to follow on a PhD journey. I followed my supervisor around. But I was asked by the ethics committee of another university in Melbourne, they said, why aren't you de-identifying these oral histories? And I said, how can you take somebody's name and identity off of their life story? That's not okay, that's not appropriate. But the system was telling me the way to protect the person was to remove the person's identity from their knowledge. Where the community was saying to me, this is my knowledge. I want that to be identified as being my knowledge. And so I changed my PhD to look at the actual process. How do we engage within our institutions? But this is really, really important when we're thinking about that and when we're looking at that. What is the appropriate dissemination of data to the people that we're working with? Because that's a really core thing. What are the community protocols and the ways of being, knowing and doing? Because that's also really, really important. So when we're then looking at that, and I won't read out all of these because I'm a very text heavy slides here. But when we're looking at that, what are we looking at as an individual researcher? So how are we ensuring as individual researchers that we are being as ethical as we can be? We are carrying on that Yindymarra into our engagements. Well, one, it's simply acknowledging the fact that you're on somebody else's country, that we have different notions of what national identity is, and that really does need to be respected. That people may not want to speak in English. Some people, English is a fourth or fifth language for some communities. And that's really, really important to acknowledge and understand and say, okay, how do I work with this? How can I do my best in this engagement? Respecting that community timelines are not necessarily our timelines is a very, very big one. It's that polite, honour, do slowly. How do we work with that? What does that look like in terms of us and our practice? One of the most important things that we like to say is are you bringing people tea or coffee? Are you feeding people lunch? Because that's essential in terms of that relationship building. It's always important to make sure that you talk to people and you get to know people and you create a relationship before you actually create the structure of your research engagement. Because if you've predetermined what that relationship looks like, then you're already starting from a position where you've given yourself the power in that dynamic. And we can't always do that when we're doing our PhDs, right? You're enrolled, you've already got a project, you're already doing what you're doing. But it's making sure that particular engagement, whatever that is, starts from the start with those people that you're working with, even if it's just a chapter and the rest of what you're doing is different. Recognising the fact that you might be working with people with intergenerational trauma. So there are some things that we think about when we're researching with Indigenous communities. University cars tend to be white, if universities still have them. I know a lot of universities don't have cars anymore. But if you're at a university, or rental cars tend to be white. White cars are also the cars that are government cars, right? So if you're turning up in a car that has nuances of somebody who's turned up to that community to harm those individuals, you're already creating a relationship barrier. If your first engagement, and I know I just said this, but if your first engagement is coming to interview people who have been interviewed over and over and over again, that's already creating that barrier. And so that's what we want to break down. We want to show people that we are genuinely engaging in the best way that we can. One of the other things that I think is really interesting that we don't necessarily think of and we don't necessarily reflect on as researchers is we define and we determine how that data is collected. So we say, okay, I'm going to go out, I'll do some focus groups, I'll do some individual interviews. It's going to be audio. I'm going to have a nice transcriber. They'll transcribe it because that takes a really long time. So I'll find somebody else who can do it. It's a whole, we've already mapped it out, right? The thing is sometimes people want that process discussed with them. Maybe they want their family to be the one that you're talking to, not just them individually. Maybe they want video recording because they want to be given that afterwards for their family or for their young people. I know elders I work with quite a bit want a video recording because they want to be able to give that to their family and say, this is my life. Because it's that tangible benefit, it's that non-traditional output, it's that making sure you're always giving back in every way that you can. I did talk about de-identification and the problem spaces in de-identification, and that's a really important conversation that we need to have in every single engagement because that can always cause that friction again because de-identification isn't always the most appropriate way to go about it. That intellectual property and copyright stays with the knowledge holder is also a really, really key thing. It's core to ensuring that people know that we respect them and respect their time and respect their knowledge. and co-authorship. Now, obviously in a PhD, that's probably not something we can necessarily do, but it is when we're working on those bigger engagements, it's looking at that co-authorship, yeah? Making sure that if most of the knowledge you've had that has shaped this product isn't yours, you've done an amazing job creating it and making it powerful, and it's a really, really great publication, but most of that knowledge is somebody else's knowledge. We want to recognise that. We want to make sure that that is part of that respectful behaviour. That person knows and appreciates the fact that you recognise that that's their knowledge that's being shared more broadly. So what does this then look like? We've talked about how do we ensure that we're ethical researchers as individuals. We've got our 22 dot points of, okay, Sadie, I'll build on this, or I don't want to do that, Sadie, go away. We've got those 22 really fantastic things. So what does that then look like when we're in our institutions? How do we create those spaces in our institutions? And I've got these photos here of Balgandra Mission. And I look at these photos not only because they're a connection to my family, but they're also a reminder of how we need to do better. So these photos are from IACSIS, so the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, the pinnacle of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research, archives, all that kind of wonderful stuff. And if you look here on the side, it says Aborigines Welfare Board, New South Wales. I don't even think it has a date on it. So the only reason I could find my family in those photos is because I knew which photo I was looking for. Only way. Because saying where the photos were from or who was in the photos wasn't important. They were photos of Aboriginal people. Nobody cared. They were just documenting, right? And this is what's really, really important when we're looking at our systems today, when we're looking at our institutions today. What are the different ways that we're engaging? How is what we're engaging with not doing the job we think it should? Because it's always important to call that out. So, creating those safe spaces in our institutions. And I just want to flag the university ethical principles because I really love them. So the University of New Mexico, the University of Alaska Fairbanks actually, what is the right word? Uses the University of New Mexico's ethical research principles. And I think that's really, really wonderful because they've seen a really good model and then they've gone and talked to their community, because I was actually talking to one of my beautiful Alaskan colleagues recently, and he was saying they went and talked to their community and then they reshaped it to how it works for their community. So they saw a good model and they said, okay, we can do this in our community as well because it's really important. So what do we have then in our university? So we're all students or staff in a university, I am assuming. What do we have in our institutions that ensures this cultural safety, that makes sure that we're behaving ethically? So we may have our Indigenous research strategies. This is one I prepared earlier. I wrote Swinburne's. I'm very proud of it. It's very colourful. It's even got a rainbow in the middle. It's I write how I dress. So do we have our Indigenous research strategies? Do we have our other policies like that? And it's really important that we do, but it's also important to acknowledge the limitations of such a document. This Indigenous research strategy is a KPI-driven document. So it requires the executive, it requires my associate dean's research in the schools, it requires the research office to have certain initiatives. Is our human ethics doing the job it should? Let's review it. Do we have enough scholarships? Let's implement one. One idea that actually came from Lisa, which made it into the document, is do we have enough Indigenous experts within our academic staff? No, okay, we don't, because we've got a very little academic staff. How do we fix that? Well, now we're talking about adjuncts. So making sure that we're engaging within that Indigenous expertise more broadly so that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students have an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander supervisor when they're going through their studies. Very, very important. And you can look to Bachelor Institute of Indigenous Tertiary Education, who does that very, very well. But what else do we have? Do we have policies at our school level? Do we have other engagements where we're saying, oh, okay, that's what we need to ensure that we're creating that safe space in our research for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research or for our culturally linguistically diverse research? Yeah, because we need to be culturally respectful in any instance. My necklace is falling down, but that's just how it's going. I just thought I'd share it with everybody. It's probably going to end up on the floor at the end. Yay. Do we have cultural competency training and research training? Have we embedded that within our school research training? Is there Indigenous elements within what we do? And it's really interesting because if we look at this in terms of teaching and learning, which obviously that's not my gig, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But if we look at this in teaching and learning, we go back to the fact that a majority of the time it's like week 7 or week 5 is the Aboriginal content. And I like to say to people, well, if you teach math, Chris Matthews is a disciplinary expert in math. So you can have him there in any week and you don't even have to say he's Aboriginal. It's a surprise. So that's the thing, is we have disciplinary experts or research experts in everywhere. And so if we do have our training, we can have that content built into our training where it isn't just an Indigenous session, which is always important, but it's throughout the entire training, or it's throughout our entire engagements, because we're recognising the disciplinary expertise of the individual, not just that amazing cultural knowledge that they bring. And then, of course, ensuring that community voices are at the core. And we have the amazing Professor Briggs in the room. And we do have other experts throughout our institutions who are traditional owners, who are people that are that cultural authority that we can say, are we doing the right thing? And if they say, no, we're not, we need to take that on board, yeah? We need to kind of learn from that and grow from that as institutions. What do we then have in our Australian policy? And I hope everybody's had a chance to read these documents. Even if you're not working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, there's some really, really great documents in terms of what is respectful research behaviour. How do we treat people equally? How do we ensure that our participants, whoever they happen to be, are having their voice heard within the research that we're doing and the frameworks we're creating? So if you look at the IATSIS Code of Ethics, it has 4 principles. And those really do go back to that nuance of, if we're working with somebody, they have the right to feel self-determined in that engagement. They have the right to have their voice feel heard, which I guess is the same thing, but I'm going with it. And they have the right to be valued, and that our outcomes and our engagements need to be sustainable. That is always really, really important. What is the tangible benefit we're giving back to people in that engagement? Whatever that engagement is, right? Because people deserve, no matter who they are, they deserve to see something that they can touch or they can feel or they can observe online that is a reflection of the time and the knowledge they've given to us. Because sometimes we're asking for people's entire lives. Sometimes we're actually asking for numerous lives. We're asking generational knowledge, knowledge that might be thousands of years old. What are they seeing from that engagement? Because they can be really happy with your paper or your PhD. They will be. They'll be really proud that they got to be a part of that, which is awesome. But what part of that product are we giving back to them so they can hold it in their hands and they can say, this is mine too. I got to be part of this. This is my knowledge that was shared and that helped. And that's always so important. I like to say, how would you treat your grandmother? And that really does need to be in every interaction that we have. How do we treat our old people? How do we treat our family? Is how we should be treating the people that we work with in research, because they're giving so much of themselves to us, mostly from the kindness of their heart. They usually don't get paid, so they're doing it because they care and they want it to mean something. Now, when we're thinking about that, it's always important to have at your core our international policies. I'm just going to take the necklace off. The butterflies are coming off. It's important to have at its core our international policies. So how are we situated internationally? What does it look like with whatever we're doing? Yeah, because we're signatories to a heck of a lot of covenants and conventions and international laws and all kinds of fantastic stuff. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people or Indigenous research, that would be the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I'm thinking here in this particular context of Article 13. Indigenous peoples have the right to realise, use, develop, transmit future stories, their histories, language, oral traditions, philosophies and writing systems, and to design and retain their own names for communities, places and persons. And that goes straight back to that de-identification process, yeah? Indigenous people have the right to be the owners of their own knowledge. All of our participants, if possible, have the right to be owners of their own knowledge. It is a really, really important thing for people, for that to be reflected back at them, that is actually their histories, their lives, their beings. And then if we think of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Article 8J, now the voluntary guidelines, I won't step away from the mic, but the voluntary guidelines, it says here, free and prior informed consent. Now, we think that we have that, and we definitely do. That's what our human ethics committees are for. But the thing is sometimes these projects that take a really, really long time, people forget that engagement, yeah? So in Indigenous research, what we do is we always take it back to the person once we've got the product. Sometimes we even take the transcript back. So we might see the person several times over and over again, because we want to ensure that that person feels comfortable with the knowledge they've transmitted. That's really, really important. When I was doing my PhD, so I have a Council of Elders, the Wiradjuri Council of Elders, and I had to write all these documents about how I would behave really ethically. And one of the things they did is they said, you need to go back to that elder, which of course I was going to, you need to go back to that elder, but then you need to come to us as well, because we want to make sure that you are behaving ethically. And we want to make sure that all those conversations, some of them that can't be had out of the community, don't go outside of the community, which is always an important thing. And it needs to be of equitable benefit. So for share and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of knowledge, innovations or practices. So how are the people we're working with, how are they sharing that benefit? It doesn't need to be monetary, but how are we sharing that benefit? Are we doing the co-authoring? Okay, we can't do that. Are we creating something else that's a non-traditional output so people can have that in their hands and they can say, oh, this is mine too? And that goes really strongly to when we're creating that project design. And when we're doing it in our HDR research, that might be something that needs to sit at the back foot just that little bit, you know, because we are studying, we've got our PhD, how does that fit into that? But what does this look like if we're creating a research project? Outside of that, we might be seeking external funding for this research project. How do we ensure that we've got our practical considerations? Are they being met? And our design elements. What are the things that we might need to put in our design of our project? So we love a co-design process, as I was talking before, and co-design seems to be the key word these days, so yay. But a co-design process is always really, really important. How are you making sure that us and our participants, whoever they may be, or our co-creators, whoever they may be, have been part of that process of creating what you're creating, whether that's a research project or whether that's a big grant application. You can see here up the top, that is the design elements of the linkage that we were successful in getting. So we really ensured what were the key elements, and I mean, they're quite similar. One just got a bit flowery the next time I went for a grant. But you can see here, there you've got your key elements, okay? For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, particularly within this grant, place-based was really important. It's about Aboriginal girls, how they feel safe, how they feel empowered, how they feel self-determined in education. Part of that journey is being on country or having a connection to country. That place space was really important. It's about having our elders work into that particular framework of knowing. So the second one, it says Elders and Knowledge Holders Committee. The first one, the steering committee, is also elders. So how do we have our elders oversight? Because that's really important. You've got years and years and years of expertise. And what are the other ethical considerations? What are the other considerations for people that they really want to see coming out of a project when you're developing it with somebody? So they want to see the importance of country and culture. They want to see the fact that they've got that sovereignty and law. They want to see that the community protocols and the data sovereignty are key elements of what you're creating. But we also need to be really, really aware of what is real and what is possible, because we all have amazingly big dreams, don't we? We want to change the world. Like, I'm out here going, I'm creating all this change. We want to change the world. And that is a really awesome thing. But we know if we're in a PhD, that's what, 3.5, 4 years. We know if we are submitting to a grant body, that's mostly they get funded at 3 years. We know that we are also individuals with jobs, with family, with other priorities. We might not be in the location where the research is. And so it's really, really important that that is embedded in to that practical considerations and those design elements, because it's not a good idea to promise people the world when you physically can't deliver it. So if you're working with people and they say, I want to do this, and you go and you say, okay, that's amazing, but what about if we focus on this part right now and then potentially we can build on it in the future? That's a much more honest relationship, and it actually creates closer connections, because you're saying this is what is achievable, let's do that together, instead of saying, sure, I'll give it a go, and then 3 years in your funding's dried up and the community's left really, really disappointed, even though you've been able to do some awesome things. So that's really, really important. It's also saying, why am I here? What am I doing? If I'm here to publish, probably not in the right space. If I'm here to give back, or if I'm here for other elements, so you've really got to say, why am I here? Because that's really important. And that's actually what drives your passion too, yeah? You're there because you're passionate about something, and you can share that with people. And then you say, why are they there? And they're there for reasons as well. And it's what intersects is what creates real power in those dynamics and those long-lasting relationships. So very fast, because I know I'm talking a lot. In the linkage project, one of the things I really wanted to do was give back at every single stage we could. So we've got 3 PhD scholarships. They're all for Aboriginal women in place, wherever they want to be. And that's really, really important. We're looking at educational elements, but what is important to them and their communities within that space. We also have 4 part-time research assistants for Aboriginal women in place, because I don't want to take anybody out of their community, because then, well, 1, that's selfish. 2, it hurts the research, because why would I do it? But 3, it's really important to recognise the fact that people are powerful in their communities, and that power shines through in the work that they do. And that actually not only creates more in-depth engagement, but it's also kind of a really beautiful thing to have in a project. We work with an organisation called Connect within that project. So that used to be the Girls Academy. Federal government defunded them. They reinvigorated themselves to become Connect, which engages with young Aboriginal women post-secondary school in employment and further education opportunities. So they used to work in high schools. They don't anymore. And one of the things that's really important to me is I can go, these amazing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women that are doing this work, how can I be of benefit to them? How can I have those tangible benefits, not only at the outcome of the research, but also in all those endeavours as we move along together, because we are growing together. It's a relationship. A grant is a relationship. It's 3 years of intense getting to know each other. And that kind of doesn't fall off at the end, right? So I want to make sure that we're of benefit, that I am of benefit to them as much as I possibly can be. And that was written throughout the entire grant. What is the strong, unique, amazing thing about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women? How do we shine a light on that? And I didn't finish high school. I was standing a little bit ago with other amazing Aboriginal women that didn't finish high school. And I want to make sure our girls feel safe in their environment so that they can finish high school if they would like to, if that's their dream, hopefully, fingers crossed. And I want to make sure that we employ that throughout the country. And that's the premise of the grant, is to say, this is what works really well. I've talked to all these amazing women, these amazing educators, these amazing teachers. They've said, this is the element that works well. Why aren't we doing it? We need to do it. And then there's the design elements. So the giving knowledge holders co-ownership, co-authorship, centralising what is important to the community you're working with, and understanding or appreciating, because we can't necessarily, even I can't understand, I can only understand my own way. I can't understand somebody else's. I can appreciate, I can acknowledge, I can respect, but that's not my life. It's not my knowledge, it's not my journey. Understanding, appreciating, respecting ways of knowing, being and doing should always be at the heart of a project. We can't say to somebody, no, this is how we do it here. Because if this is how we do it here and it's against what the community wants or how the community feels or how it should be done in that respectful manner, then maybe we need to go to somebody else and say, do you do it here? Do you do it there the same way? Because this is how we do it here has been done to us so many times. And it gets heart-wrenching when you've got to walk into a room because you're the only person who can. And the last time you were there, you cried. But you've got to pretend you didn't. Because it's the only way we can create change. And we don't want that to happen to our communities, yeah? We want our elders and our knowledge holders to feel safe. As Indigenous people of this country, our stories are precious. They have survived our generations. Our elderly have passed them on to us and will continue to pass them on to our children. We have our own ways of telling and listening stories, which are important to us. When we're creating these engagements, no matter who we're creating them with, we need to do so with respect, through elements like Yindymarra, to appreciate and honour the way of being and knowing and doing of the people that we're working with, because they're precious. And that knowledge, no matter what culture, no matter what community, is thousands of years old. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
We have a bit of time for questions, and I hope this has inspired a few questions or comments in all of you. And we have microphones, I think roving mics. Ari's got one at the back. So much to take in.
You can even say, no, Sadie, you're wrong. I'm cool with that too. You might do it completely differently. That's good too. That's research.
Anyone feeling inspired? Yes, we're at the back. Oh, here comes the mic. Oh, was that me? Yeah.
Take this so we can hear you. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. There's just a lot to think about in there. And so, yeah, just really thankful. My question is around the navigation, particularly for HDR candidates between, I think upon entry to university, they're often signing documents saying their research is sort of owned by the university. And then if they're researching with communities, of course, this consideration about ownership of knowledge completely contradicts, previous documents that they've signed. So I'm just interested in maybe even in talking to models at Swinburne to sort of how to navigate that kind of space around respecting cultural ownership, cultural IP, and then those sort of institutional processes that sit there.
Yeah, definitely. I think those institutional processes, and the mic's not on, is it? Do you want me to repeat the question? I'll repeat. So
did you get my question?
No, I understood. Yeah. I'll just repeat it for the mic. So it's when we enter university at some institutions, we have to sign documents saying that that knowledge is the institution's knowledge. And so how do we ensure that if we're then creating relationships with communities and contradicting those documents, what does that look like? I think that's a really, really interesting question. I know some universities are moving slightly away from that model, particularly, let's be honest, in the arts and humanities. And I am an arts and humanities student. I'm a journalism student. But, unless it makes a lot of money, they don't really care. So they are moving away from that model. And I think that's a really, really good thing to do because it should never have been theirs to own in the first place. It's a really interesting situation when we look at human ethics committees because human ethics committees are engaging more and more with IATSIS. Others, of course, engage with MHMRC, but it kind of sometimes depends on the institution as to whether the Human Ethics Committee engages with those guidelines. I know, for example, there are some universities where they almost exclusively do, and some universities where they almost exclusively deal with IATSIS. So it's quite interesting. But they are becoming much more conscious. So if you're working with human participants, they are saying you need to make sure that these people still own that knowledge when you're engaging with them. You need to make sure that you are having respectful behaviour. But it does leave us in the position of saying, are our different departments talking to each other? Because sometimes they simply don't, particularly at our much larger institutions, but even at our smaller institutions, they don't necessarily talk to each other. It also comes down to when we're enrolling, what are those relationships that we want to have? But once again, we may not know that. When we're starting out at our PhD, we've got this beautiful idea of what we want to do, but we're not necessarily sure how that works and what that looks like. And that's why I ended up changing mine. So mine was about Wiradjuri elders' oral histories, which is what my Council of Elders asked me to do. And then it became a product of talking about the process and how do we be ethical. And that really did go down to the fact that I started my PhD at Monash and I got 17 questions back in my ethics, most about why are you identifying? How dare you identify your participants? And I was like physically can't do anything different. So what do you want me to do? And I did end up passing the ethics, but for me, it was that really pinnacle moment of saying, why am I justifying my community's knowledge in an institution that simply doesn't understand the way we do things? And what does that then look like? But you're right, there is the contradiction in some institutions even now still, and they are changing, but it is still problematic. And so we do need to have a systematic review on what each of our departments are doing, what our admissions is doing, and then how does that work in 2022 and beyond when our social consciousness has changed beyond the university being the owner of all knowledge to people themselves being able to own their own knowledge. That wasn't an answer, but I gave it a go. Charlene. Mm. Well, and I think it's also acknowledging, and I completely agree, and that's absolutely amazing work. And I think it's also acknowledging that we've moved on from the fact that we just used our HDR students as fodder. You either did the work of the professor or but you're not, right? You are a researcher in your own right. You have an amazing project that you have decided to do. You are an academic just as much, or a researcher just as much as the doctor, associate professor in the room next door to you. And it's really important that we recognise the fact that that relationship then has to be the same as any other academic when they come into the institution. It's your intellectual property. You need to be able to reflect that, and then you make the agreements with other people in terms of ensuring that their intellectual property is protected. But I think it is that respectful, how do we move on from there, and how do we acknowledge that expertise that you bring?
Yeah. Do you think that Indigenous people are the only ones studying Indigenous? My group, like myself, do it.
Yeah, I think it's not a study of, it's a research with. Yeah. And I think that's the really, really important thing. So I didn't talk about it, and that is unfortunately an oversight of my own. But the new research codes, so does everybody know their FRO codes? Everybody know your FRO codes. The new research codes that came out of the review finally had an Indigenous code. So before the review of our national research codes, we had 6-digit codes for Indigenous research. Institutions only report on grouping codes, which are 4-digit, or disciplinary codes, which are 2-digit. So if you did Indigenous research, it wasn't reported on at an institutional level, and it wasn't included in research excellence. Now we do have Code 45 Indigenous research, which we're all very excited about. And that recognises the fact that we not only have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research, but we also have Maori research, because we share our codes with New Zealand, and we also have Pacifica research. It's important then, and this one, go back. This one here is about ethical research practices, so the bottom one. It's important then, when we're thinking about Indigenous research, not Indigenous-led research, so Indigenous research done by non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, that we are creating that respectful relationship, because there is a lot of research done by non-Indigenous people, which is awesome, which is fantastic. Some of it's great, but it's not always for the benefit of the people that they're working with, because in health, it's easy money. In education, there's quite a lot of money in education as well. And so we want to make sure that if you're working with people, that it is that genuine partnership. So yes, if you're non-Indigenous, you can work with Indigenous communities, but it's that co-design. It's that making sure that we're working for the benefit of people, and that we haven't predetermined what's good for people. We've actually created a real relationship, and we've said, hey, am I of any use? And then somebody said, oh, well, this kind of needs doing. And we've gone, all right, I can help with that. And that's a really good way to start that relationship, because we've got all of those different skills that we can bring, because we're experts in our own fields, and we can do good that way, but we can't predetermine what somebody else needs. I hope that's, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those questions. Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for that's my direct.
I know. I was very impressed. Esther is the architect of the matching bag. And thank you very much to everyone who's helped with organizing this event. As we mentioned at the top, this is the first of a series of events this week. And if you are keen, please do come back and spend a week with us. We do have refreshments just outside of the room, so please do stay on, have a little bit of nibbly and a glass glass of wine, and hopefully Sadie can stay for a little bit
Yeah,
and
definitely.
have a chat. So thank you very much
Thank
for
you,
coming. Thanks
everybody.
again, and yeah, catch up.
Thank you.